Now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show, which is presented to you by Power Planter Earth Augers, the official digging tool. To find the right size for your digging project, visit powerplanter.com. Now here are your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
Welcome back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show. Holly, let's go to our hotline and bring in our guest for this week.
Erin Schanen is a blogger, plant enthusiast, avid YouTube gardener, and gardens in Zone 5B in Wisconsin. She's been featured in a number of magazines. She's also a garden speaker. Her website is theimpatientgardener.com. Welcome to the program, Erin.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day. I know you're doing some pretty big projects there on the YouTube channel, and we thank you for joining not only Holly and myself, but all of our listeners from across the country.
I'm so excited to talk to everybody.
Great. So you are called the Impatient Gardener. Why is that your name or your
What's
title?
the secret behind it?
Well, don't you think all gardeners are a little bit impatient? I think we all it takes a while to learn. And certainly when I created the blog, The Impatient Gardener, back in 2009, I was a semi-new gardener, and I was really quite enthusiastic, but perhaps not completely realistic. And, it's something that I have definitely learned over the years, although I still sort of struggle a little bit with that. That sit back and recognize that Mother Nature is pretty much in control, and all we can do is sort of adapt and do our best. And sometimes it's out of your hands. So it's just kind of how that all started, was that I was ready for some instantaneous results. And we all know that is not something that happens in gardens.
Were you one of those people that watched a lot of TV and saw there wasn't an issue, was boom, plant the first 8 minutes, harvest the last 8 minutes, everything was perfect, not a problem in the world type of intake?
Absolutely. I readily confess to being completely taken by sort of the television model of gardening and, all the DIY projects. Everything gets done in 20 minutes like magic.
Yeah, and there's never a problem, and everything fits the first time. It's wonderful how that all works.
Right, yeah, and then reality strikes, and you realize that is not how it goes. But that's also, part of the joy of gardening as well, as those challenges.
Definitely. It's funny, my manager at work, it's his first year growing vegetables, and he has a lot of questions for me, which I'm glad to answer. But he's like, well, when this is done, what else can I put behind it? And I'm like,
pump the brakes, buddy.
like, you got a couple more weeks, maybe more than that. Just be patient. So many people end up having to divide their hostas because they kind of overgrow. When is the best time to divide them, and what is the best method?
Hostas are such forgiving plants that you can divide hostas almost any time of the year, except when they're dormant. I tend to divide hostas in spring when they're shooting up. They're a few inches tall, but the leaves haven't unfurled yet. But you can certainly divide hostas in summer. Once you get past sort of that hottest part of summer, it's actually a really good time to be able to go in there and do that as well. I believe in the, at least for the home gardener, who's probably going to divide a hosta into like quarters or halves, probably not pull apart every single eye to create 15 plants out of one hosta. For most home gardeners, I fully believe in sort of a deep breath and a sharp spade and a clean cut through it. And it's amazing how quickly you can divide hostas. And like I said, they're such forgiving plants that you replant that and give that nice drink of water, baby it a little bit for a short period of time, and it will reward you with many more hostas to come.
And hostas are one of those plants that can really tolerate the shade much more easier than a lot of plants.
Absolutely. And the one thing about if you do divide them when they're in full leaf, sometimes the leaves get a little bit floppy. You can just kind of tie the leaves up, and they don't look their best that year, but as long as they've got a good enough water and you've got them in a spot where they've got some shade and they're not stressed, they'll put down roots and they'll be fabulous the next year.
Well, now with everybody kind of getting into the swing of summer, people are redoing their backyards, redoing their landscape, and edging their landscape. What is the right way to edge a landscape? And I'm thinking the answer is not just get the shovel out of the shed and just start hacking away. I think you're going to give us a little more information and the proper techniques in which to move forward with this.
Yeah, so first of all, of course, you want to define the area. You want to define the bed. So you can use a lot of times you can use a hose to sort of help get an idea of what you want that bed to look like if you're creating a new bed or expanding a bed. And then in terms of edging, there's permanent solutions and then there's sort of temporary solutions, and it all depends on the aesthetic you're looking for and how much money you want to spend on it. So some people will go, you can do bricks or you can do permanent poured concrete curbings. But the simplest and my personal favorite way to go is to just cut a nice clean edge between the grass and the bed. And the secret to having a good edge between the grass and the bed in order to keep the grass from getting into your garden beds is to have a very straight edge on the grass side and then kind of a V that goes into the bed side. And you can do this in multiple ways. You can use like a gas or electric powered edger to initially cut that. You'll still have to go back and clean up some of that grass and sod that you've sort of created by cutting that. But you can also use a flat edge spade, or there's half moon edgers specifically made for this purpose. And you just want to cut along that line that you've defined. And keep in mind again that you want that straight edge on the grass side and then a V on the other side, and clean it all up. And then throughout the summer, once you get that edge made, that will last for most of the summer, if not all of it, as long as you go back and sort of just clean up where the grass is kind of coming in there. And I use a long handled lawn shears for that. It's about 2.5 feet or 3 feet long, and you can stand there and just chop along. But you can also use like a string trimmer turned upside down to go along and just kind of trim that grass really neatly in that edge. And that will keep that edge looking great and keep that, most importantly, keep that grass from growing into your beds, because really that's what we're trying to do.
And just like any job, if you do it right the first time, the maintenance on that particular edge is going to be minimal compared to if you just, it's good enough, we'll finish it up next year, it won't be that bad, and that grass creeps back in there very quickly.
Yes, it does. It's amazing. And of course, a little bit of mulch in your bed will certainly help that as well. Although what you don't want to do is fill that whole V up across with mulch, because you're just kind of creating a nice little area for grass to kind of jump back in. But you're, like you said, with all good jobs, do it right the first time, and then you save yourself time in the end.
Definitely. Now, we invested in raised beds to save ourselves time and amongst other things and our sanity, because we were just tired of dealing with those weeds taking over. For those who deal with a lot of weeds, what are your best methods for dealing with weeds to reclaim their gardens?
Well, I'm with you guys. I love raised beds for a lot of reasons, one of which is not having to deal with weeds getting in your beds. Especially if you're starting with a new garden area and you're trying to create a garden where there wasn't before. You do have to get rid of grass and in particular weeds before you go there. And there's sort of three ways to do that. You can dig it out. Obviously, there's a lot of labor involved in that, but that works. You can smother it, which is sort of a longer term process. So some people will do, a lot of people call it sort of sheet composting, where you'll put down cardboard and then you put some mulch or compost on top of that. But that's something that takes a bit to work. So maybe that's something that you might do in fall in preparation for a bed in spring. You can also use plastic or something like that. But the idea is to smother those weeds and that grass out. Or for people who are okay with using a chemical, you can use an herbicide applied very carefully according to the directions on the bottle, if that's something that people are comfortable with. Of course, there's pros and cons with that people need to decide for themselves if that's the right move for them.
And with any kind of herbicide, more is not better. That's why there's directions on the bottle. And just the same as fertilizer, more is not always better. You're going to cause more almost irreversible effects on the problem. It's going to be a bigger problem than what it was before you got a hold of it.
Exactly. And that's such a good point, is that there's a reason there's directions there and you need to follow those to a T if that's the route that you want to take. But you can also try a combination of these things. Try digging them out or try smothering them. And if you decide that's not working for you and you need to go to the next step, you can maybe take it to the next step. So it's one of those things people kind of have to decide for themselves, but they do need to, act with an abundance of caution if they're going to go the herbicide route.
Right. And there are some weeds that's just realistically, do I want to fight this for 5 to 7 years, or do I want to make a one application and get it out and deal with it that way? So yeah, it's personal situation for personal situations on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And at some point there's you need to weigh the pros and cons of this. If your plan is to create a meadow, if you want to create a meadow created for pollinators or something, and you're going to replant everything with wonderful pollinator plants, maybe one application of herbicide that takes care of that problem and gets you to that end goal ultimately maybe turns out to have more benefits than cons. If you want to grow vegetables and you want to get to that, weigh that. But especially when you're going into edible gardens, do be careful with the herbicide, and just, approach that cautiously.
Well, let's talk about gardens. It's never too late in our world, and I'm assuming your world as well, to start a container garden. And what are some plants that could be grown right now in the edible or even the ornamental world that would be really good fit for early July, mid-July in most parts of the United States?
I love growing in containers, and I love, especially for newer gardeners, I think containers are such a great way to get into it because there's very little commitment, very little cost involved in container gardening. So I know a lot of people are getting into gardening this year in particular. So if they just haven't gotten to it yet, it is not too late to get going. So, when you're looking especially for edible crops for containers, first of all, one of the things that I always go to is herbs. They're very easy to grow in containers. In a lot of places, you'll still be able to buy plants. And in a lot of cases, this is actually a great time to be sowing things like basil for a second crop. I mean, a lot of people have got basil in the ground already, but a lot of people are looking at second sowings of these things. So herbs work great in containers almost always. Also, there are some great varieties on the market of vegetables that are specifically bred to be smaller and be happier in a container. So look for those container varieties of things. And then especially if you're going to be sowing in July, look for things that have a short maturity date so that look for like a maturity date of 45 days or something. So you're going to be able to guarantee that you're getting a good harvest yet this year. It's definitely too late to be thinking about like a 90-day tomato or something like that at this point, but there's a ton of vegetables that are still good for that. And so you do want to, take your time and sort of pick things, and rather than just say, I'm going to pick a zucchini, there are some zucchinis that are just like 45 days, and you could still do that in a container because there are actually container variety of zucchinis out there. Beans, I think, are a pretty good thing to be sowing right now. You can certainly grow bush beans in particular in containers, work really well. And if you have a little bit of a semi-shaded area, I am a huge proponent of sowing lettuce, especially cut and come again varieties. They don't love heat, but if you have them in this semi-shaded area, that works really well even at this time of year. Just make sure you keep them, moist, not wet, but moist. And of course, if you're growing in containers, always make sure you've got really good drainage. But it's almost limitless what you can still grow in a container at this point. You got plenty of time to get great food. And then for flowers, honestly, you can grow just about anything. If you can find some flowers out there already growing, plant up a beautiful pot for yourself, or combine it with edibles. Things like nasturtiums, which are beautiful flowers but are also edible, are super easy to grow from seed, and they're nice big seeds, so they're easy for kids to plant if you want to get kids involved. Plant up a pot of those or put those in with your vegetables in your container garden, because the sky's the limit on that stuff.
A lot of great information, Erin. We appreciate your time. How can people find your blog, find your YouTube channel, and follow you throughout your growing season?
So people can find me at theimpatientgardener.com. That's my main website and my blog. Over on YouTube, it's YouTube/ The Impatient Gardener. And then I'm on all the social media channels as Impatient Gardener. So you can find me there as well.
Well, Erin, we thank you for taking time out of your day and to not only educate Holly and myself, but all of our listeners from across the country and on all the stations that we're on.
It was wonderful to talk with you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.